we're here to talk about Based on a True Story. So joining us this morning are filmmakers Jeffrey Friedman and Rob Epstein, directors of Howl, which plays again tomorrow morning at the film festival. And to their right, we have Annie Sundberg and Ricky Stern, co-directors of Joan Rivers, A Piece of Work, which is playing again tomorrow night at the festival. Both are waitlist only, so get in line early. And moderating our panel this morning is Wesley Morris, film critic at the Boston Globe. So please welcome everyone.
So, hi.
Hi.
Hello. So we're here to talk about what basically I think is probably choices in terms of how filmmakers decide what they put in their films and what they choose to leave out and what they choose to focus on. And I'll start by saying that one of the things that I think I was taught when I was learning about documentary filmmaking, was that, and I found this shocking at the time, was that everything you see in a documentary is not necessarily true. True is often, or the truth is often in quotation marks. It's subjective, it's relative, it's subject to interpretation. But it is rarely, according to, it is rarely completely true. And I think that was a mind-blowing idea for me at the time, since we were learning a lot about objectivity and that sort of thing, and that nonfiction filmmaking was supposed to be, or anything that was nonfiction was supposed to be objective. But you have issues of point of view and choice, and you have a story to tell as well. And that also requires some decision-making in terms of what your point of view or subjectivity is going to be. So I was curious because you're both, all four of you make documentary films and you make them as a team. How that process, or how that philosophy of what the truth is enters into how you choose to tell stories. Because you've also made, Rob and Jeffrey have made, you guys sort of work in a milieu, so to speak, that is fairly, you make films focused on gay life and gay history, and you guys are worked far afield in terms of your subject matter, but now you guys have also made a non-documentary, basically, documentary. So can you just talk about the choices that you guys make in terms of how you choose to be subjective?
Start? Okay, I'll start. Well, I guess I've always, let me start again. The first film I did was a very constructed film, which was The Times of Harvey Milk, and the approach on that film was to reconstruct the story. So very different from a more traditional cinema verite documentary where you're filming the story as it's happening. So it was all about reconstructing the story. So automatically that becomes one's own interpretation of that story and one's own representation of that story. So And that's been the approach that Jeffrey and I have taken on the majority of our films, and that's very different from the Joan Rivers film, for example, where the events are unfolding as they're happening. So in making Howl, it wasn't such a leap for us to work with documentary elements to tell a narrative story.
And I would only add that when we have worked in more traditional verite situations, we're also making choices. We're thinking about telling a story, and we're thinking about what the best, what's going to work best to build a story. And we're not manipulating what's going on, but we're making choices about what to film and what not to film, and what perspective to take and who to follow, and all those choices are informed by this idea that we're creating a story. So it's all very artificial. You know, on top of that, we try to, you know, I think we try to have a responsibility to our subjects to be honest and to present them in a way that feels truthful. But the operative word there is feels. You know, it's you're constructing something that feels like reality.
I would say that Annie and I, most of our documentaries are sort of cinema verite based, and that and are character driven. So I think for us, just having a relationship with the main characters in the film sets up, you know, our point of view from the beginning. And of course, you know, you're picking and choosing all along what you are going to, what the story is going to be, and as it's unfolding, you're constantly editing in your head or on paper what's happening. I mean, we did a film years ago about a boxing gym in the South Bronx, and we went into it thinking our main guy was going to be the next junior Olympic champion, because that's what he was supposed to be. So the film was going to be about the next junior Olympic champion in his year. And of course, every fight we ever went to, he lost. And it became, we were really bad luck for him. But it became a film about, and I remember at the time, because it was like, I don't know, over 15 years ago, I was like, oh my God, you know, the story's not working, it's not working. But then finally I was like, well, it is. This is what the story is about. The story is about turning 15, losing the drive, and what happens to a lot of athletes when they turn 15. You know, it's that it became a different story. And I think with Joan, you know, people ask, when I went into it, did I know, you know, what it was going to be? I knew. I had a one-page that I wrote 2.5 years ago that was about who Joan is, where she is in her life as an aging performer, and the sacrifice she's had to make in her comedy career. Now, narratively, I didn't know she was going to win Celebrity Apprentice. You know, and I mean, and people say, like, well, what if she hadn't won? If she hadn't won Celebrity Apprentice, in many ways, it would have been probably a more poignant end. She would have been maybe not on a Hollywood high, but, you know, just sort of slogging through it. She wouldn't have been at Foxwoods with 4,000 people. She would have been back in Wisconsin, you know, not wherever, somewhere else. But you know, so did I answer the question?
Yeah, sure.
And I was just going to add that, you know, as all of you said, it's about choices. It's like any of you have sat down to write something. You know, it's about what is that story and what's the meaning of the story that you're looking to tell. And even, you know, when Ricky was looking at Joan, it was about themes. I mean, there are lots of, for people who've seen the film, a lot of people have wondered, well, why didn't you put that thing in that I know so well about Joan, or why is that element of her life not covered? And for Ricky, it was all about choosing a theme, and the focus of the film was really about getting inside the world and the heart of an aging performer, and everything else was extraneous and started to fall away. And I think that even if it's a verite film and you're capturing moments objectively, as you're talking about, the thematic choices that you make are always present. And I know we're working on a film right now that's a different, very, very different process. It's about a Burmese soldier who became a pro-democracy activist, and it's a film that came to us to basically make by a photographer who had spent a lot of time getting to know this fellow. So we had a bunch of photographs in an interview, and the question there is, how do you add themes to something that you're not able to shoot? You know, and then it's all about choices in the editing. You know, it's sort of like, how do you know, so sometimes the choices come when you're filming, and sometimes it's when you're actually editing. And yeah.
I was just going to add one more thing about Joan Rivers. So when she saw this like 85-minute cut, that was, you know, yeah. Hello, can you hear me? When Joan saw, now I'm slouching. Okay. Can't do it. There we go. Okay, when Joan saw the film, you know, first she liked it, and then she had like pages and pages of notes, and it was like, it's boring, boring, boring. And I'm always in the makeup chair. I'm like, but you are, you know, because you're working, you know. But but the point is that, like, I was like, Joan, you know, it is just my perspective. It's one little point of view about your life in this 1 year. And it's hard for subjects sometimes to absorb and go, but that's not, you know, what about, you know, she wanted like big happy endings and things that were just, you know, other things. And I was like, but that's, you know, this is the take that, you know, that the film is. So it's hard for people sometimes to have their life interpreted through your one little narrow point of view.
Well, I was just going to ask, analogously to what Ricky was saying, that whether or not you guys have a similar run up against a similar problem in terms of what your subjects, how your subjects want to be portrayed, versus. I mean, I imagine the problem's a slightly different one with you, given the historical nature of the work that you do, but you still have a lot of sort of legacy issues to deal with and people who are living beyond the actual events you're talking about.
Yeah, I would say that the people you're interviewing, you interview them because you have an idea of what the story is they're going to tell, and they don't always tell exactly the story that you're expecting. When we were making Paragraph 175, that's playing tomorrow, I think, or today. Today. We were talking to older men in their 70s, 80s, 90s in a couple cases, who had survived the Nazi era in Europe and were remembering 50 years earlier, and they had told their stories. Some of them had told their stories before, some of them hadn't, so we didn't know exactly what the stories were going to be, but we had a sense of all their stories, and some of them changed, and some of them changed in ways that made us really uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And
How so?
well, one guy, Albrecht Becker, who's a photographer, German, Christian, homosexual, went to jail during the Nazi era and spent 2 years in jail and got out of jail and went into the army during the war.
Mm-hmm.
And we just found that really off-putting.
Yeah.
So we had to deal with that. We tried to understand it, and you can sort of see us fumbling in the film to try to understand it, or you can hear us. But actually, it ended up making the film more interesting. I mean, we thought it was going to be a disaster. Every one of these things, as you said, we thought it was going to be. It was, how are we going to, it's not going to work. But every one of those things made the film more rich and complex.
Yeah, I mean, in that case, it goes back to thematics, as you were talking about, because we went in with a somewhat simplistic thematic notion of what the story was, and it became more complex. So you adjust, and then it became more interesting as a result. When you're doing historical films, with Harvey Milk, for example, I have people who still won't talk to me because they weren't included in that history. So,
welcome to San Francisco. That's all I can say. Well, and in terms of how, when these things sort of crop up, you're a team, but you're also individuals with your own ideas as well. And how does the way you guys approach a subject as a team differ from how you'd approach an individual? I guess we're talking about problem solving, and the conversations that allow you to get at something that is both either entertaining for an audience or true to your subject, and then satisfying to you individually and then as a team.
well, with us, usually if one or the other of us is having an issue with something at hand, it always points up to a problem that we have to solve, and we arrive somewhere different from where we expected we would be, and it always makes it better. So in that sense, the creative partnership, it functions to take you somewhere where you might not expect or you might not get to if you're working individually or on your own.
I was going to say, to echo that, there's a blessing about working with someone who you trust creatively, because, as you were saying, something comes up and it's just nice to have another set of eyes, or someone who. And I also even think in the filming process, sometimes in particular long relationships where people may get tired of one person, in the field. It's sort of nice to bring a fresh energy in, even in the actual physical production. And we've talked about that with some of our longer shoots. There was one film that we worked on that was shot over 14 years, and each, at different points, people had different relationships with the different characters, and it brought something out. But yeah.
And then I have someone to write obsessive emails to in the middle of the night, what are we gonna do? Oh my god.
And the same has
Oh my God.
proven true with actors for us. We found that on the set that worked with actors as well as doing interviews with actual non-actors.
Well, I was going to ask about that. What's the fundamental difference, I guess? I mean, because you do apply your usual aesthetic approach to what is inherently, I guess, a dramatic situation, or a sort of constructed situation, where you have, what you're doing is basically making a live or sort of dramatic documentary. And how do you, I guess, how do you?
I like that term, dramatic documentary.
How do you deal with actors in a way that is sort of useful for you and then not alienating for them?
Well, you're dealing with them as people,
Right.
really. That's what it comes down to. And with each actor, it's different. I think that's the thing I learned most with this first narrative film that we did, that you have to find a way to deal with each actor individually and figure out what they need at that particular moment. And some actors will give you very specific direction as to how they want to be treated. Jeff Daniels, we had dinner with him the night before, or a couple nights before our shoot, and he said, "Here's how it works with me. You get 3 words and make them all adjectives."
Right.
We didn't really do that.
We didn't really do that, but it sort of gave us some parameters.
The main difference is that actors are there to give you what you're looking for,
Right.
and very often subjects, they're not professionals. You have to do a lot more work in a way to get what you need from real quote real people. Actors are real people too.
Right. Sometimes.
And I would say also we look very much at the subjects in our films almost as if we're writing a fiction story. Like as an actor, as you would if you're an actor, what am I playing? So we say, well, what are the stakes for this person? What was their childhood like? You really sort of want to understand the subjects in your documentary the way you would if they were being cast and written as a fictional character. What drives them? What's the relationship with their children? Why do they live in this place? How do they live? And all those things sort of help you understand who that person is and helps you interview them. I mean, you have to become sort of a chameleon in many ways. When you go over to in your German, whatever it is, and you have to be like, you have to just sort of become whomever that person is as well, so they feel comfortable.
I was going to say, I think sometimes the risk with documentary filmmaking is that what's the motivation of the person on the other side of the camera to say yes? Because, sometimes stories can get misinterpreted often. It's a funky medium, and I think that we're lucky in that we have, and it sounds like you guys as well, have really interesting and good relationships with documentary subjects. I don't think we have never gone into a project with a let's get them kind of mentality. That's not the kind of films we make, and we're not looking to do a setup sting operation on people. We may still someday, but but it's an interesting. I was just thinking about your choice about teamwork and how that plays into solving problems and getting to the truth. A lot of it is often I'm sure you guys brainstorm too, but what is the question? What are the interviews? What's the focus of this, and what you're getting out of that character, bouncing ideas off each other.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that I'm always curious about with documentaries, just generally, is what role the camera actually plays in terms of what you're getting from people. I mean, in terms of in the case of Joan Rivers, it's quite obvious that I guess the object is to trick her, to remind her that there is no camera, maybe. Obviously, you want the camera there because she'll become Joan Rivers, but I mean, I think there are moments in the film where she just seems unaware of the fact that she's being filmed.
Oh, yeah.
And how is that? I mean, is it the matter of having the camera around all the time?
Yeah.
Which is different, I guess, in the case of Daryl Hunt, where the camera presents a whole other series of possibilities and problems.
I can just talk about the Joan thing. Yeah, I mean, so I filmed Joan a lot because she's in New York. I could just zip up there with a camera and maybe shoot for a couple hours. It wasn't a big deal, and honestly, I mean, the film looks quite beautiful, but we didn't even really light it. Like, you know, it was just adjusting for this with this camera, and it was just a 2-person crew, and it was, you know, non-fuss. And a lot of times it was just Joan and the crew and Jocelyn driving around. You know, the 5, 6 of us, whatever it was, driving, you know, from Palm Beach to Key West to Miami, and you know, so that's where stuff, and oftentimes I would just be rolling in the car, you know, and so there's a comfort. They're just people say like, oh, is she always on? I don't think she's always on in the movie. I mean, she's not just but she's like that in person. Like if you most times she's very up. She's not ever not up, you know, for the most part. And she is really funny, and she's making quips. So what you see in the movie, and you see her in the car, or you see her asides coming into a room and checking it out, that's just Joan. I mean, that isn't her performing for the camera. Right. I mean, she does obviously play to the camera times, and she's aware the camera's there, but we were there so much that it's just not, you know, you just get used to it. Right. And I think, and in fact, she's now hired our crew, Charles and Seth, to come and shoot some of her reality television shows, because the 2 different ones she's doing, because she is so comfortable when they have to shoot at her house in Connecticut. She wants them because they're like her family now.
The only thing I was going to add to that is that the difference, you know, and when Rick was shooting a lot with Joan, is that Joan is very comfortable, obviously, with cameras. It's, you know, this is part of her world, and so she includes dialogue to the camera, in particular to Charles, who was shooting, because they developed a nice, easy relationship. And so there's a part of that intimacy that I think is why I hope is one of the reasons why people are connecting with Joan, because she sort of talks through the camera almost directly to you, in a way that, you know, Daryl Hunt, who'd been in prison for 19 years. These are people who are much more sort of wary of the camera. It's a different relationship with the camera.
And you guys also, I would assume, have a similar problem with people just sort of being comfortable opening up to you with a camera present. I mean, saying one thing when there's no recording device, and then saying something when there's a camera that's going to show the world, you know, the truth.
That hasn't been a problem that much. You know, we spend time with the people we're interviewing beforehand so that they get comfortable with us. We try to create a very intimate environment. We try not to have any distractions. Other people. It's also a very small crew. And as much as possible, we try to make it an intimate conversation, and the intensity of the actual filming somehow heightens the intimacy, rather than making it uncomfortable. It makes it more intense usually. So I mean, as long as whichever of us is doing the actual interview is staying focused, the focus of the subject is there. And one of the things I learned from Rob is to shut up after somebody answers a question, because often the best moments in film, in our films anyway, and a lot of films that I see, come when people have finished talking. So they're like trying to come up with the answer, and you know saying it in different ways, and then they're just sitting there and thinking and reflecting, and often those moments are the most kind of potent.
And, you know, all that said, all that everyone said, you are always looking for that moment when people do forget about the camera, when they really are so in their own moment that it's all about that moment and it's not about the camera.
Do you find that audiences are more sophisticated in terms of what the questions they ask you about the choices you make with your movies? I find that it's really interesting to listen to people talk, for instance, about Michael Moore, who's a very good example of somebody who clearly makes choices when he makes a documentary. And I think that, I think in the last 10 years or so with the news media, I think that people are now much more questioning about how information is presented to them. And I think that does begin to affect people's both their appreciation of documentary filmmaking and their sort of wariness to believe everything they're told.
Well, I was going to say there's also been the bastardization of documentary, which is reality television.
Yes.
And
that's a good point. But I also think that I don't know. I mean, you can answer the question. I mean, do you think that people are able to separate those two realms? Because they're obviously different. But I don't know if that's me, because I can separate them. But I mean, I do find that people don't expect from you what they expect from like Real Housewives of Orange County, or wherever the hell they live.
I don't know. I don't know if audiences. I mean, certainly in this context, in the general put it on the television context, I don't know how discerning viewers are.
I mean, we're certainly finding when we try and pitch stories or series or docs that most channels now, unfortunately, cable, they need it to have a reality television arc. Well, what's the stakes for this? Well, how can we heighten that? Well, what are you going to get in the second act? And so you can't really just, our sort of method of just making good stories, documentaries, they're this, they shall remain nameless, but a lot of these, they can't program them anymore. So they have to have this kind of reality television hype to it, which is just awful, I think.
I was just going to say, I mean, on the notion of manipulation of stories, I mean, I feel like now there's so many channels where we get information, and some people have, like, I'm sure each one of you has a preferred place where you go to for your news, and I think that, the way Michael Moore, they're almost more like opinion. What does he call himself?
He doesn't call himself a documentary filmmaker anymore. He's like an essay. Is he like an essay?
Editorial essayist or something like that. Jeremiad artist. I don't.
Yeah. But it's interesting because when people are looking, I think, at least, I'll talk about my own. When I go to a documentary, I'm going because I want to see something that is real, that has captured a moment of a truth that will take me to a place that I couldn't access on my own. And I'm hoping that was done with authenticity. And I think that I don't trust Michael Moore as a filmmaker. I'm interested to hear what he has to say, and I'm interested to hear how he puts his ideas together and what his points are. But it's sort of that notion of, I guess, maybe we are becoming more sophisticated as audience members, and we're aware that certain things are being manipulated, and it's more about what we're seeking in that medium. I don't know.
Well, that's a sophisticated distinction, though, that you like his movies, or you're interested in what he has to say, but you don't trust his filmmaking.
Well,
that's
he I think, if I can, I think originally when he came out, there was this sort of sense, whether he perpetuated it or not, that like, this is the truth, here's what's going on in Michigan, and but now I think he's more open to. It's like, no, it's my opinion. I'm giving you an essay on film about, I'm giving you an op-ed basically. This is my opinion. This is my take on it, and I'm not going to apologize for it. So I think he's understands, or that's sort of his. Just I don't know if it's justification, but that's how he talks about his films now. And I think originally people just perceived that they were like, that this is the truth and all the truth.
Well, I think one of the major points in his turning point in terms of how he perceives himself as a filmmaker is that the people, his subjects, turned on him, and they brought to the public the fact that whatever I did with Michael Moore was sort of like not like 40% true, and then he took what we did and turned it into his movie, which I think it goes into this idea that I think that people who consume culture now are slightly, I do think they're a little, they expect more of certain types of nonfiction product, to use a horrible term, but that's what basically Bravo is putting out, versus what you guys do, which is a totally separate thing in terms of the choices you make and the things you want to avoid doing.
This is the thing with Michael Moore, and I asked you guys. So in one of his films, I think it's Bowling for Columbine, he says you can go into a bank, you can open up a checking account, and they'll give you a gun right then and there. So, and he does it, he opens it, he walks out, he's got a gun. Now, it's not the truth. The truth is you can go, you have to register for that gun, and then you have to go to a gun dealer. He arranged for the bank for the gun to be there. Now, I think that's bending the truth. That's false.
Yes.
It's just not something I would present as fact because it's just a lie. Now, he should have just gone to the gun, but, you know, he wanted it to be dramatic. I mean, would you ever do that?
No.
So that's a pretty line in the sand to draw, and when we wouldn't either. Like, that just wouldn't feel right to me.
But then I think, I mean, I don't know if a lot of you saw The Cove this past year, but like, you know, that was a fascinating film to watch because that was investigative journalism on one hand, and it was also really constructed like a caper movie.
Right.
And so that, you know, they knew that to get people past the idea of like watching a horrible dolphin slaughter in a bay in Japan, they had to structure it in a way that would be a familiar template for people, you know, that would get them in on this crazy ride. And it's like this, it's a weird blend that I feel like we're starting to see more and more of in docs. I actually get excited about it because I think that there's so much more artistic potential in documentary form. Just because there are so many different ways that you can take a story now that seem to be accepted. And I think people understand that things get manipulated, but they're still looking for that moment of truth in a documentary.
And to Michael Moore's credit, he has helped. I mean, he really created a whole new genre, which is personality-driven essay film. So that was, I can't really think of an example of that type of documentary filmmaker before Michael Moore. But yeah, but it's true. I think it's now all of these different ways of approaching documentary are available to filmmakers, and you can work in mashup form or you can work in any one of these modes. So it's all sort of part of the palette now.
I really loved the movie, but I had a question about dealing with the subject, and in particular Joan Rivers. You, I guess, found her at a certain point in her career where she was very open to something like this because she wasn't really at a very high point. I'm wondering, do the subjects sometimes dictate what they're willing to do and whether they want control over the end product, particularly if you're dealing with a celebrity?
I just in Joan Rivers' case, when I asked her if I could do this documentary about her, she was very quick to say yes. And then, you know, we had a meeting, and I was just very clear, like, I need full access all the time and full editorial control. And she said yes. And she was incredibly, you know, come to everything. There were meetings that, you know, her assistants didn't want me to go to, and I would just have to go to Joan and say, I need to go to this meeting, and she would say, of course, you got to come. So it was after the fact, I think, you know, so in Joan's case, it was always open. Now, there are other subjects that put limits, and you have to say, okay, I'll do this, but I know I'm only going to get this. But it was after the fact with Joan where she, I think, you know, had, you know, gave me these notes and notes and notes, and I had to say politely, like, I'm sorry, but like that, it's going to be okay. Like, you're just going to have to live with it. And she did. You know, there were slight things that she said something about her husband who committed suicide that Melissa was upset about, and so we could sort of like soften certain things, because I just didn't want her to hurt her relationship with her daughter. So yeah, you make sort of little concessions along the way, but not if it's majorly important, you know, to the story.
And what I'm going to say, it has nothing to do with Joan, but it's actually, we've had this debate with other filmmakers. It's like, how do you handle certain subjects who either have a lot of power or you deeply want them to tell their story and they know what's at risk for them to say certain things. So two filmmakers who we know, one of whom just finished a film about a very famous, you know, celebrity as well. And there was a lot of money and a lot of people involved. And they had a 48-hour rule, which is, you know, basically, if after 48 hours you have not written to me to tell me you can't use that, I own it. Meaning that, like, you know, in the scope of covering, it's going to be Fast and Furious shooting, and if after 2 days of sober thinking, you're like, please take that thing out that I said. But if you don't say it after 48 hours, it's off the table, and I get to use it however I see fit in the edit room. And then another person knew, it was a fairly politicized doc that just premiered this past spring, knew that after the interview, they would never get... Getting releases from people is always a dance. Sometimes you just start shooting because you fall in love with a story and you're like, oh my God, we have to start shooting. And then you have to realize, oh shoot, I've got to negotiate a release now with this person.
You don't do that. Doesn't happen before.
It generally should, and
Okay.
we like to say that it happens that way, but it doesn't always happen that way. But this is someone who basically told his camera people, from the moment this person walks into an interview setting, you're rolling. They don't know you're rolling, you don't announce it, and you're going to basically fake it later and tell them that, okay, we're ready, we're speeding.
Was it Charles Ferguson?
Yes. And
my
when,
guess.
exactly, because when he was shooting, he knew that after the interviews, these people would never agree to sign a release. And
Well,
so,
I mean, that movie is. Have you seen the movie?
I
I'm talking about
haven't.
Charles Ferguson. This film called Inside Job, which is. I mean, I don't know when. I think it's going to come out in the fall. It's about the financial crisis, basically, and some of the information in this movie is just mind-blowingly incriminating for many of the people, and it has all the elements of what you guys are talking about in terms of, you know, the silences and the. This is the guy who made Taxi to the Dark Side. Not Taxi, not No End in Sight, right? So this is sort of the same aesthetic, and I'm surprised. I mean, I'm not surprised that he.
So what did he do? Basically, he just told his cameraman, like you guys, so from the moment they start walking in the door, just film them greeting people, film them because they're still probably going to like Wesley, you know, before the panel. They may not like him after the panel, but get them signing, film them signing the release. And it was literally like he had his camera people rolling from the moment that person walked in, because a lot of people stormed out of the interview, and he knew he'd never get a release after he asked them some of these questions.
Did he get the release before?
He had them sign the release beforehand, and he had it filmed because it was sort of the double protection, because he knew that these guys were, many of them could lose their jobs or their careers because of what he was asking them.
Oh, they will. Another question?
Try to stand. Mr. Friedman, when you said that you had learned stuff from working with Mr. Epstein, that kind of struck into my mind the fact that there are two co-directing teams here. And I was very curious as to, in your particular genre, how did that work, working together as directors, as co-directors, as equals?
Who wants to start?
You guys.
Well, I mean, our answer to that question is usually what you see is how it works. There's no formula, first of all. We've never tried to define any aspect of our working relationship, so I think that's what's made it work. A lot, I mean, you know, 90% of it is temperamental, our temperaments and how we work together and complement one another, and it's just I think it just has to do with the two people that we are. There tends to be a level of trust, and I guess that's the key thing, is that you really have to trust your creative partner and trust their instincts, and when you disagree, know that you're going to find a way through the disagreement and come up with a solution that everybody can live with, and that's going to make the work better.
And don't argue in front of the children.
Although, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
It's similar for us, you know. Although the Joan Rivers film is very much Ricky's film, and it's a unique situation because Ricky had a relationship with Joan that was also, it was in part, you know, because you, through your parents, had had a chance to meet her, and Joan is one of those people who really trusted a very small crew, and so. Yeah, it was it was a different setup for us. I mean, sometimes it's a mix. I'm sure you guys have run interviews. One will run an interview, the other will run an interview. I mean, we were actually pitching ourselves to a job, and we were basically saying, you know, the benefit of having two for the price of one is that, you know, one, if you have stories that are unfolding at the same time, it's actually a blessing to trust the other person. One person can be following one thing and another part of the story.
I just wanted to ask a very quick question about how you get your subjects to feel comfortable with you. And I think that one of the things that I was struck by with Daryl Hunt, for instance, is the fact that you were in an environment in which, you know, you were probably the only white people for a lot of it. And what you realize over the course of the film is that they are trust. There's some level of trust in terms of what you're getting out. And was wondering just how comfortable you felt with their discomfort, or whether there was any discomfort, or.
It's so funny because I mean, 3 films that one I've done and two that we've done together, and it just it's never like you go and you're making a movie about a white lady, except for Joan Rivers, like there's always. I mean, in fact, we never made a movie about a woman before. It was always like movies about Puerto Rican boxers in the South Bronx. Go figure. So we never. I mean, I'll speak for myself. I never feel like I'm the white girl in the room. I mean, I'm never conscious of it. Mm-hmm. I've never felt with subjects that they're conscious of it, quite honestly. Obviously, it exists, and in some ways with the Daryl Hunt film, because it's about an African-American man who was convicted at 18 of a rape murder in the South of a white newspaper reporter. It was very divisive in the town. It was a racially charged trial, and and he was released 20 years later. But we were following it mid-trial. We could kind of walk in both doors. We were with the white district attorneys who were a whole other world, and there was a lot of sort of unspoken prejudice. And we could, as the white team, come in and talk to them. But, however we were welcome, we felt very welcome in the African-American community because I think they thought, well, we're going to tell their story. Or I don't know why, but,
But they trusted that.
Yeah.
They trusted you, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, the trust thing is, I think, just a human thing. You just.
But I mean, it is sort of mollified or obstructed in some ways by things you have no control over as well.
Yeah, it's true. But Larry Little was he was a former Black Panther who was running Daryl Hunt's. Yeah, I mean, I think Larry is very conscious of race, and it was very much like how he thought of the trial. Now, Daryl, of all people. I mean, I don't know if you saw the film, but I mean, he's just the most loving person, and he just, it was never an issue for him, race. I mean, his white attorney became his best friend and his savior in many ways. So, I think it's just about adapting to the moment. If you're going to film wherever you're filming, you're adapting. You're going in, and you're not coming with any kind of baggage. You're there to like sort of be a sounding board for that person.
And the only quick comment is that I think the only reason why I brought up Larry Little is I think that people are wary of how their story is going to be used. And as Ricky said, it's a human thing. And is there a trust thing that gets established? And I think that Larry had seen how the media had screwed them, basically, to be honest, over many years. And I think that it was very much of prove to us that you're worth my trust on some level at one point. But
very much, yeah. I mean, basically it was like, now take this story and do something with it. Like, I was like, I will. Okay.
The only other aspect I would add to that is that we have to find a level of trust with the subjects. And in the case of Paragraph 175, we were coming into a different culture, a different language that neither of us speaks. I mean, some of the interviews were conducted in German, and they were done through an interviewer and an interpreter and headphones and this whole complicated setup. So we weren't always exactly sure what we were hearing and whether we were interpreting it right. And so a lot of it was just getting to a point where we felt that we could trust the people we were interviewing. Mm-hmm. And I think that process.
Were there things that you could use to do that?
Are there what?
Like, were there things you could rely on to do that? I don't know, any like
just
tricks or
human contact. Eye contact, yeah. Just like stopping the interview, stepping out, and taking a moment, and saying,
also
"Are you okay? What's going on?" Just a moment of real humanity.
The camera also gives you a lot of power, a certain degree of power, and you have to trust your instincts that you're not abusing that in any way. Mm-hmm. But I think the camera certainly changes the dynamic.
Right. There's another question in the audience.
Thanks. If I may for 1 second, my take on Michael Moore. I think he's an entertainer, and he's trying to make you laugh. So he sets up a lot of scenes just to be funny. But my question is this: I saw student shorts yesterday at the presentation. 5 really wonderful films, no documentaries. And the question was asked, were there any documentaries considered? And the answer was there were very few submitted this year. So I'm just wondering if you have any take on that. Is it just a coincidence, or might there be a trend? And what do you think about student films in that sense?
I'm sure it's just a coincidence. I actually teach, so I work with young students, and there's still certainly a lot of interest in documentary as well as narrative fiction.
I think often student filmmakers don't have a sense of how much work is involved in crafting an engaging documentary. They think they can just go out and shoot something and throw it together and it'll be a film. So there may be a lot of films that just aren't quite, the filmmakers aren't quite there yet. But I don't think it's a lack of interest.
Hi. I was really moved by The Times of Harvey Milk, and I really loved Howl. And I was curious as to how you felt about portraying real events in a narrative piece, and what were the freedoms and drawbacks that you came into making that movie.
In making Howl?
Yes.
Well, the freedoms were that we could change things. We could decide how people were going to respond to things. When the words that we used were words that all the people in the film actually spoke, but they were transcriptions. So we didn't really know what it felt like to be in the room with those people. So we got to create the world. So that was the big difference, and we tried to imagine what we thought it might be like. We tried to make something that felt plausible, but there's no way we could know what it was really like.
And I guess the restrictions, was that the other part of the question? Budget. That's really where mine goes on that. The necessities of budget, and that's always what creates restrictions on any project, ultimately.
It seems like it's such a new movie, Howl. I don't know that I've ever seen anything like it. You guys did docs before. Are you going to continue to do this sort of hybrid kind of thing, or are you going to continue to do docs?
I think that was the hybridization of Howl was creatively what was so, one of the many things that was so exciting for us, to realize that we could take what we learned and have worked with in documentary and work in a whole other form and have all these different styles available to us. And I think that's possible if you really sort of create your own rules for all the different elements that you're working with. And that's something that we did learn from documentary when, for instance, when you're working with archival footage and you're working interviews and you're working with different elements, you really have to understand exactly how you're working with each of those elements so that each film has its own design. And we approached Howl in the same way. Whether or not we continue to work with that kind of hybrid, just the project will dictate that. But we are, hoping to continue to do narrative films as well as documentaries.
Right here. I can actually.
Hi. I'd like to make a comment and ask a question. The comment is about truth. And I made this comment yesterday. I went to see, Chris, now I'm going to have a senior moment, but the film about, oh gosh, hold on. Well, okay, I'll come back to that. Because I'm just a little nervous. Camera, I gotta get comfortable in front of the camera. But about, editing, it was Prodigal Sons, and editing the brother, Mark, that, Kim edited in a way that kept him sympathetic. And that documentary really does speak about truth. I mean, truth is perception as well. I mean, if you ask two siblings about their upbringing, you'll get two different truths. And I think as a documentarian, an emerging documentarian, you know, that's what I struggle with. I had a story in mind I was motivated to tell, but as things unfold, it's that decision about what to include and what not to. And my question is, I'm struggling now with kind of mid-production budgets, that kind of thing. Looking for mentors or anybody that could help. Do you have any kind of wisdom to, you know, that's not a young documentarian, but emerging in terms of where to get, you know, personal resources, not necessarily, I know about the foundations, that kind of thing, but what could, you know, to get people to...
Where are you based?
Well, I'm here. Basically, I'm Boston. I just moved up from Connecticut, so I was in New York, but we're kind of moving around a bit. But yeah, probably Boston area.
There are a lot of filmmakers in Boston. A lot of documentaries. There's a strong documentary filmmaking community. I would say just try to hook up, you know, network with other filmmakers. You know, we have a kind of family of filmmakers in San Francisco that we count on to give us feedback and to be brutally honest with us, and whose opinions we trust. And you know, they're people we've known for, you know, decades. So I would just advise you to cultivate those relationships with people whose work you respect.
I was just going to say, and you can meet them at film festivals like here, you know, it's like, but I was also going to say, I wasn't sure when you were talking about personal resources, if you're looking for people who can help you shoot, if you're looking for feedback, if you're looking for actual hard cash, like, you know, there are a bunch of different, again, it's so much of it is about, yeah. I mean, I will say.
As one person taking this project on, obviously,
Well, I mean, projects also at a certain point tend to attract the right people at the right time. If it's a project that you believe in and your heart is invested in it, and you're going to do it come hell or high water, eventually the right people usually find their way to it. So just keep at it.
I would say find an experienced producer to work with.
right.
I mean, it took Kim like 2 years to edit, you know, on and off, and she persevered, and it was not an easy. I mean, I think what's interesting is everyone when you get to a place where you can actually sit and reflect on your film, you're like, oh yes, it was this and that, but you know, it was a bitch the whole time, right? I mean, it's never easy. And Joan, I didn't get financing for Joan. No one would put up financing for Joan. Our company ended up having to finance, like, with every penny, and it was all deferred payments. People got paid pennies, literally. You know, so the money thing is always a struggle. It's never been, has yet to be easy for us.
Right. Well, that's what's kind of discouraging.
It is. You just got to do it. I think what you said is beautiful. That's
it.
it.
Reality.
Right.
That is, yeah.
As the art form proliferates, I think the standards by which many filmmakers choose to tell the stories is lessened. And I think that is the point at which, you know, nonfiction filmmaking and reality television kind of meet up. Which is to say that, you know, many shows on TV, the reality television shows, look great. And many nonfiction films look terrible. And it's not because it's not a budgetary thing. It's just sort of a lack of interest in, you know, or a lack of respect for the art form. I mean, as a moviegoer, you kind of need more than the information. You would like the movie to look like a movie as well.
A lot of people think because they have a camera that they're shooters, you know, that they're DPs. But, you know, people make a profession of it because they actually can take that digital camera that all of us can push the button on. But Charles, who shot the film, is a 32-year-old. He was a photographer. He's just, I mean, he can come into a room with no lighting and make it look beautiful.
What was it shot on?
It was on the Panasonic HVX 200.
Oh, wow.
I
That's
mean,
amazing.
with a little
adapter.
No, it was no.
Oh, the
No.
interstitial shots.
A couple, yeah, but no, I mean, the panoramic shot maybe, but no, I mean, mostly not.
Exactly.
I rented it one day, you know. We're saying, like, that camera, everyone picks up and shoots with, but you would shoot in here and it would look awful if you didn't know what you were doing. So I think it's, as you said, there's a craft and people have made professions of it.
So, it's also what television networks are willing to show, and standards have really shifted downwards. I think they don't want to pay as much. They realize they can get product, as they call it, for less money that doesn't look as good, and that people will still watch it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of depressing.
Mm-hmm.
If you
it's
like
really
to
depressing.
watch, if you like to watch beautifully made films.
Or it doesn't even have to look great. I mean, it just has to look professional. Do you know what I mean?
It has to look like,
the
filmmaker
cares, right? Exactly, and that's sort of what you're left with when you've got this important message you want to put across, and the movie looks like,
But have you heard about a film called Catfish?
Yeah.
It was at Sundance. So that's an example of like the medium fitting the film.
Right,
because-
but that's a perfect, right, exactly. I mean, it looks like what it's about.
Exactly.
Right.
Like two guys who basically stumbled into a film and practically did shoot it with camera phones.
Right.
But it's a riveting story.
It
and
can
it's
work.
a little bit like a Blair Witch Project, though,
Right.
because it's sort of the what's real and what's not real in that film. But like even Josh Fox, like I was thinking Gasland, I mean, he took the only camera he had to use was a Sony PD-150, which is what we used to use to shoot Trauma Life in the ER, because I worked in reality television. But that camera, it's an old lined standard def video camera that looks like crap. And he basically wanted to give it a feel, and so he kinnied it. He took his Sony PD-150 footage, shot it on a white wall with a digital camera to give it an effect and a feel, because he wasn't willing to just let that PD-150 footage look like what it was. Right. So
what you're talking about are artistic choices. And what I'm and what we're all agreeing is that there is sort of a lack of that sort of premeditation, I guess. With a lot, or there appears to be anyway, with a lot of the movies that manage to get made and distributed. While a lot of really good-looking movies go undistributed and sort of languish as well. I mean, it's a matter of luck too. Any other questions in the audience? Right here.
We talked a lot about trust and authenticity. I was curious. There's the Janet Malcolm essay about a journalist basically dealing with guile and trying to get moments of truth from a subject that they don't want to give you. And I was thinking some of the most interesting moments in the Joan Rivers movie are clearly things that she probably wouldn't put forward in a story about herself, like when she's confronted by the guy with a deaf son in the theater. Is there points where it's not a matter of trust, it's a matter of getting the truth by any way you can?
Well, I guess if you think about that's the verite part of it for sure. I mean that if you're sitting down and you're doing an interview, they know that they can hold back or they can give you what you want, or you can try to get it out of them. But if you're following someone, which a lot of what we do is shoot verite. You are hoping for that moment that something unexpected happens. And I mean, when we did this film about these boxers, a mother came home, she was drunk, and the boy had been living, hadn't been talking to us about the fact that his mom was an alcoholic. But here we had this scene. I mean, they eventually asked us to go outside and turn the cameras off, and so we just had audio recording. But so we were able to capture the truth. Now, in the end, we never used that in the film because it was, we didn't want to sort of out his mother at the time and whatever. But you do sometimes capture these moments of truth that the subject themselves is not wanting you to capture. And then the question is whether or not you're going to use those. Whether or not you destroy your trust and their trust, and by using something that is clearly going to be embarrassing to them or offend. And in the case of Joan and the heckler, she actually said, because she rants for a while at him, and she wanted it to. Why do I have to go on for so long? Why can't you just cut that? I sound. She was very self-conscious about how she sounded, and she wanted it to be short. And I was like, look, that's the whole point. It's that you move on to other things anyway. I don't know what I'm saying.
But I think that by any means necessary is a dangerous phrase, though, because as Ricky pointed out, it's about damaging then that crucial trust that you have with a relationship. And I think if you're doing an investigative documentary and you're going to chase that story until someone shoves a fist in your camera, then it's one thing. Like, it depends if you have a long-standing relationship with someone and you're hoping they'll reveal things to you down the road in a different way, versus this is your only moment to go get that piece. Like, I hate to bring up Gasland again, but Josh Fox. Like, I mean, there are moments where he really, by any means necessary, he actually really tried to get shots that he knew it was a one-time only moment.
We wouldn't feel comfortable saying I'm making a film about you because you're a wonderful Boston Globe reporter, and then spin it and be like, he's awful. See, listen to him. He doesn't tell. We never. That's not how we would do it, and that's why after making so many movies, people would trust us, and we show our films. We say, look, we had a 10-year relationship with this person. All of our films, we've had like ongoing relationships with every subject, person that's been in it for years.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me about the Janet Malcolm book, The Journalist and the Murderer, which is a beautiful book, that story is a little more cut and dried, but she also talks about every relationship that a journalist has with a subject. The subject has his or her own agenda, and it can never be the same as the person who's doing the reporting or doing the observing. And you have to create a level of trust and with the understanding that you're not making the film that they think you're making.